All right, and there we go. So with that, thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. I just want to go ahead and turn it over to Jerry Miller, President of Michigan Association of Conservation Districts, for some quick introductory remarks. Go ahead and take it away, Jerry. Oh, 1 second, I think you're still muted. I will unmute you.
There we go. I've got it now, Dan. Well, thank you, Dan, for the introduction. And I want to start by thanking each and every one of you and all of the district directors, associate directors, and staff across the 75 conservation districts. It was not without your effort, talking to your legislators, we would not be having this session tonight. So I saw Mark posted a quick note in the chat box already for the thanks, but Mark and all of you, it was your efforts that allowed the conservation districts to receive funding from the state legislature. So I just don't know how I could be more gracious and thankful for all the work that you have done over the last couple years, actually, because this has been an ongoing long-term effort. In fact, your previous executive director, Lori Phelan, brought together a small group back in 2015 to start a strategy, develop some what we call white papers, discussed how we could regenerate funding that had not from the legislature, since we had not been funded since 2009, 12 years ago. So that's been really a 6-year effort to get to where we are today and where we got to at the end of September with the legislature appropriating funds for your district. So thank you for that work. I want to also acknowledge we had some champions in the legislature that really was key to getting this appropriation for your district. Senator Roger Victory in District 30, that's in Ottawa County. Senator Victory chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee, and he was a champion, along with his colleague, Senator John Bumstead, Newaygo, and Senator Bumstead represents Newaygo, Oceana, and Muskegon District, I think it's 34, 36. But those two senators were the champions that really led the charge in the legislature. We had champions in the House, but not at the same level as we did with Senator Victory and Senator Bumstead. So if those are your senators, please thank them. But I would also encourage you to thank all of your legislators. When the bill came up in the House, there's 110 representatives in the House of Representatives, and all but 6 voted to support the appropriation. So if you haven't called your legislator, and that's what I would recommend, just give them a call, and you can probably end up talking to their aide, but give them a call and thank them for their support of this legislation. I know, will appreciate your feedback. So thank you for that effort, this grassroots effort across the state of Michigan, across all 75 districts, to secure this funding for your district as we go forward in FY22. I have some other comments a little later, but at this point, I would like to turn the program over to John Switzer. John's the program manager for conservation at the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. John has walked in some of your shoes because he was a district manager in Kenton County before he moved to Department of Ag and Rural Development several years ago. So with that, I'll go back to mute. And John, thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate that introduction and warm welcome. I am going to attempt to share my screen here. We'll see how well that goes. Hopefully you are seeing the presentation. Is that coming through for folks?
Yep, it's coming through, John.
All right, I got a thumbs up. Great. Well, first, I'd also like to just say thank you tremendously to Michigan Association of Conservation Districts, Jerry and Dan, Elaine and Nancy, the Executive Council, the State Council, all the folks who were involved in that funding work group that Jerry mentioned over the last several years, the countless number of hours of meetings that we sat through, doing what we could to advocate for where we're at today. As well as thanks to all those folks out there, directors and staff who did what Jerry mentioned, reached out to their local officials and conveyed the importance of this. This truly is a very, very happy day for all of us, and very appreciative of everyone and the work that they've put in for this to happen. As well as Jerry and Dan, I've been bouncing a lot of emails and phone calls your way lately. I appreciate the input, the feedback as we work to pull this operations grant together so that we can get this funding out in the conservation district's hands in the best way possible. Also, just like to thank my team, the regional coordinators, Rachel Guth for doing the heavy lifting and putting this presentation together, as well as the rest of the RCs, Christy, Jack, Jim, all the help that they've had in pulling the grant together, pulling the reporting form together. So we're all here, happy to be part of the team here to see this through successfully. So with that, I'm going to jump into the presentation here, and I will say up front, we had talked about the best way to try to present an operations grant, and really the best way to do it is just to go through the document itself. So I apologize in advance. There's not a real exciting or fun way to do that. Hopefully it's not too bland or boring for you here, but hopefully there's some good information that we can get out to folks. So first off, for those of you who have not had an MDARD grant in the recent past, all of our grants are very consistent in format, and they consist of a cover page with a signature page, some contact information, some general terms and conditions, as well as some special terms and conditions. And I'm going to spend the bulk of the time tonight talking to the special terms and conditions. But I do want to point out the fact that there is some important information in the general terms and conditions portion of the grant. That's going to be the first several pages that you'll see in the grant language, and that does include some things like conflict of interest, the cancellation policy, as well as, again, important contact information for some of the folks involved in the grant. So while I'm not going to speak to it directly here tonight, I do think it's important that you spend some time looking through that. Before I go on, are you seeing the full presentation mode, Dan, or are you just seeing the slide with the extra slides on the side?
So we see it in the edit format right now. So if you start your slideshow, it should come up full screen for us.
It's not letting me do that. I think it's because I tried to move it over here so that I could be looking at the camera. Give me just a second. Let me see if I can fix that. How's that look?
There we go. You're good.
Okay. All right. Well, I apologize. I might be looking off to the side here. Hopefully it's not too distracting for you. So essentially skipping to page 7 on the grant. And if you happen to have a copy of the draft grant language, this presentation does generally follow the order of the grant language. So starting on page 7, the statement of purpose, it really is at its heart to establish minimum conservation district operational requirements that are rooted in conservation district law, and to provide support for the basic operations of conservation districts. So it's pretty straightforward, the intent of this grant. And then right underneath that, the statement of work and the expected outcomes and goals for this grant are to provide citizens easy access to natural resource management, assess and analyze local natural resource management needs, provide basic resource management information and assistance uniformly across the state, implement natural resource management based on the needs identified, and then to continually improve the capacity of districts to deliver natural resource management assistance. So everything is built around those core concepts here. So from this point, we get into the services provided section of the grant, and I threw the word deliverables in here because this is a deliverables-based grant, and I'll get to the details of what that means in a little bit, but I wanted to help make that connection for folks. So the first one is hold regular board meetings and we're defining regular as a minimum of at least 1 board meeting per quarter, totaling 4 board meetings per year with quorum present. Those board meetings need to be conducted consistent with the Open Meetings Act, and that includes posting requirements, keeping meeting minutes, establishing a schedule at the beginning of the year, and then designating a board chair at least annually. That's interesting. Also, conduct an annual meeting and election as necessary, as defined by Conservation District law and consistent with the procedures identified in District Operations Manual. So if you happen to have director terms that are coming up this year, this calendar year, excuse me, this fiscal year, the expectation is you will conduct an annual meeting and election. If you don't have any directors that are up for election, there's no need to hold the election, and it would be optional if you want to hold an annual meeting. As well as approve an annual budget and appropriations act for fiscal year 22. Hopefully, now that since we're 3 weeks into fiscal year 22, for most folks, that's already happened. But in the event it hasn't, please make that a priority to get a appropriations act in place as soon as possible, following the appropriations act process and budget process throughout the year, and amending those as necessary. We're also asking folks to conduct a conservation needs assessment. Now we've rephrased this process, formerly known as the natural resources assessment. This is to be consistent with other language that's out there, specifically in the NRCS NRCS manual. But conducting a conservation needs assessment once every 5 years. Through broad-based community participation and through the process that we've identified in the revised Conservation Districts Operations Manual. Now, if you have one of these that has been done within the last 5 years, we are not requiring you to redo that, although you may, especially given the new template that's been developed, if you choose to. We're also asking that an annual business plan be developed to meet the goals of the districts and largely be used guiding mechanism to develop that, and listing goals, activities, funding sources, partners, and timelines to achieve those. Now this will be for fiscal year 23. So the idea is that you'll have the whole year to work on this and send it to us just before the end of this fiscal year so that you have it up and running ready for next fiscal year. And then there's a group of about four 4 items in the grant that are a little bit, I'd say, more of a softer deliverable, not as easy to measure or document. And those include providing citizens access to natural resource management assistance, education, referrals, implement management activities based on the needs identified, continually improve the capacity of the district to deliver natural resource management assistance, and cooperate and collaborate across conservation districts, including promotion and participation in other district, USDA, and MDARD programs as appropriate. Lastly, develop or update as necessary and approve a district policy manual that includes board and personnel policy, the Freedom of Information Act, a credit card policy, and an investment practice policy. Now, those last two are right out of law, and even if you don't have a credit card, even if you don't have investments, there still needs to be a policy in place. Those are fairly simple to do, obviously, if you don't have either of those, and we do have some examples to help work through folks if they find themselves in a situation where they don't have those. So the next section of the grant dives into the budget, and this is where I wanted to speak to this deliverables-based grant. If you happen to have another one of our grants, a MEAP grant or a FAP grant or something like that, those are all a cost reimburses basis grant. So that means you have to expend the funds in order to get reimbursed for what you spent. Because this is a deliverables-based grant, that is not necessary. And I was very intentional in developing this grant this way because I realized 75 districts are all in very different places. Some have fully staffed offices, some have very few staff, some have no staff, some have no office. I didn't want to limit folks' ability to get access to the full funding, frankly, because they weren't, it didn't cost them $40,000 to implement this grant. So what that means is, as long as you're doing the things that are in the grant and documenting it accordingly, you're going to be getting the the full $40,000. Use of the grant funds could be as flexible as possible and as apply the varied needs of the districts.
Oops, having some technical difficulties. John, I think we lost you there for a second. I'm gonna.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on. I got a message saying I had bad connection.
Yep, maybe turn off your camera and then you'll have to share your screen again.
Okay, we'll give that a shot. And if I'm breaking up, let me know and I'll try something different.
Okay.
What could possibly go wrong with a webinar, right? A live webinar.
There we go. We see your presentation again.
All right, where'd I cut out at?
I think it was specifically, if you go back just one previous slide, probably be good to repeat.
Right here, did we get through the policies portion?
Yeah, we might.
Okay.
Let's start there. Yeah.
Start right here. Okay, deliverables-based grant. So again, I apologize for the technical issue and apologize if I'm repeating myself here, but this was specifically developed to be a deliverables-based grant as opposed to a cost reimbursement grant, which all of our other technical assistance grants are cost reimbursement. So what that means is you do not have to fully expend the $40,000 in order to receive the $40,000. What you do need to do is make sure you're fulfilling the deliverables in the grant and documenting that as required quarterly, which we'll get into here in a second, in order to get access to those funds. And again, did that very intentionally to account for just the varied scenarios that districts find themselves in across the state here. So we do include a list of allowable expenses in the budget section of the grant. Again, tried to make those as flexible and wide ranging as possible. Includes employee salary, taxes and benefits, training expenses, travel expenses, office supplies and equipment, including accounting software, postage, printing materials, and I think this one's an important one, match as a leverage for other grants, and then also audit expenses. Payments, again, $40,000 grant. Payments will be split into 5 equal payments of $8,000 each. And again, being a deliverables-based grant, significant progress will need to be documented to receive each payment. One thing I didn't include, it is in the grant language, but we do require that QuickBooks be utilized as the accounting software. So if folks find themselves without having a QuickBooks account right now, again, that is one of the allowable costs in the grant. And we have contracted with an accounting firm to provide some limited district resources. So let us know, let me know, let your regional coordinator know, and we can put you in contact and work towards helping you get set up in QuickBooks as quickly as possible. So from a reporting standpoint and a grant payment standpoint, again, broken into 5 installments. The first installment will be made upon execution of the grant agreement. We have gone to a new system for executing grants called e-signature. In the past, we would send 3 copies of a grant in the mail. We'd need a board chair to sign all 3 copies, mail them back to Lansing, or we would get our division director's signature, and then one of those final copies would be mailed back to the districts. It was pretty time consuming, a lot of paper shuffling. 2 years ago, we made a switch to e-signature, which essentially is an email that'll go to the board chair or the designated signee from the board, where you would apply an electronic signature. It sends the document back to us, where we can apply an electronic signature, and we have an executed grant. So one of the challenges with this system is me and my staff don't know exactly when these grants go out. We don't get copied on it. If you have a district manager, they don't get copied on it. But we'll do the best we can to let you know, to check your mailbox that the grants have gone out. I asked Kelly Parker, our grants coordinator, and just today when these grants will be going out, and she said hopefully by the end of the week, at the latest early next week. So you should be seeing them show up here very, very soon. The other thing we require for execution in that first $8,000 installment is your fiscal year 22 approved budget. And then again, consistent with conservation district law, we are requiring all districts to have a regular audit, and law says that needs to be conducted once every other year. So if you have a completed audit for fiscal year 20 or somehow already for fiscal year 21, we just need a copy of that cover letter sent in. If you have not had an audit in the past or not within the last 2 years, we require a copy of an engagement letter with a CPA firm saying that you are scheduled for an audit for fiscal year 21. And then lastly, we need an invoice for the $8,000. One thing you'll notice, again, back to the difference between a deliverables-based grant as opposed to a cost reimbursement grant, we are not requiring a profit and loss be submitted as part of the reporting process for this grant. All documentation needs to be sent to this website, this email address, mda-esd-grants@michigan.gov, and that is in the grant agreement. And this is the mailbox we use for all of our grant management process. So that includes our other technical assistance grants, as well as hopefully you've already been sending board meeting minutes and things like that to this mailbox for some time. After that, the payments are going to be made on a quarterly basis. So the second installment will be made at the end of the first fiscal year quarter, which ends December 31st. These are due by January 7th. And that includes a quarterly tracking report for those previous 3 months. And I'll be speaking to that here in just a few minutes. And then copies of approved board minutes for the months of September, October, and November. Now, keep in mind, approved board minutes typically happen the month after the minutes are collected. And so that's why you'll see that these are off by a month, September, October, November, as opposed to October, November, December. So keep that in mind. And then lastly, an invoice. The third installment will be made end of the second quarter, due April 7th. Again, the quarterly tracking report for the previous 3 months. This is when audits are due. So cover letter of your completed fiscal year 21 audit. So we're giving you 6 months to get your audit done if you haven't done one. Again, approved board minutes for the last 3 months and an invoice. The fourth payment at the end of the third quarter, due July 7th. The quarterly tracking report. This is when we're asking for a summary of the completed conservation needs assessment. And we have developed a template that was developed through the MACD funding work group about a year and a half ago. We'll make sure to get that in folks' hands. Again, approved board minutes for the last 3 months and an invoice. And then finally, the fifth payment, due a couple days earlier, October 5th, and that's because at the end of the fiscal year, we're on a abbreviated deadline to get everything in and closed out for the end of the fiscal year. Once again, the quarterly tracking report for the last 3 months. This is when we require the annual business plan for the upcoming fiscal year to be submitted. We have not yet developed the template for that plan, and we'll be working diligently to get that done very, very soon in cooperation with MACD. We'll send that out to folks as soon as we have that ready. Again, approved board minutes for the last 3 months and an invoice. So here's a glance at what the reporting form is going to look like. This is going to be just a simple Excel spreadsheet broken into 4 quarterly tabs. And we do have a tab that has a definition or explanation of each one of these categories. I'll go through this briefly. We'll likely have some follow-up on this report. The first thing up here is going to be a number of new grant proposals submitted. So again, keep in mind that it's important for us to report back on what we're able to accomplish with this funding. One of the things that we're hoping to measure is what type of impact this had in terms of leveraging additional funding. And so if your district writes for a grant of any kind during this time frame, then you just simply would put the number of grants that you submitted. Also, if you happen to receive a grant that you submitted for during this time frame, we'd like to know that as well. And then the amount of funding that you leveraged as a result, whether that comes from a federal, state, or local or other funding source. We'd also like to see how many board meetings you conducted during the quarter. And then collaboration and partnerships, how many partnership meetings that you attended, as well as how many legislative meetings, county commissioner meetings, one-on-one meetings with your local representative, things like that. And then lastly, we'd like to know what type of outreach you're doing, workshops, events, things like that, and how many people attended. This form is going to be the same for all 4 quarters, with the exception of the 4th quarter. There's a few additional questions that we're going to ask. And this again is for us to be used in our final annual report. We'll ask the number of district programs. So if you've got a tree sale program and a maybe an equipment rental program and a forestry program, then you would list that as three district programs. We'd also like to get a handle on the number of full-time equivalent employees your district has. And so we're defining that as 32 hours or more to be an FTE, as well as the number of seasonal employees that you might employ throughout the year. We also are asking for some other information. When you submitted your conservation needs assessment, when your annual meeting and election was held, when you submitted your annual business plan, when you updated your board and personnel policy, when you updated or implemented your FOIA policy, your credit card policy, as well as your investment practice policy. So just a little bit more information on that fourth quarter in order for us to, again, accumulate this data and roll it up for our final report. One other thing I would like to quickly point out, and this is back in the first section, special terms and general terms and conditions. Back in 2004, a law was passed that basically says if you're going to do business with the state of Michigan, you need to sign up for electric fund transfer as opposed to paper check. And then as of about 3 years ago, we went to a new financial management system called Sigma. And if you have not had a grant with the state of Michigan in the past, it will require you to go in and get registered as a vendor in Sigma. We can make sure to get you this information, the website and how to do that. But there is what they call a vendor self-service portal. And on that portal, there is several guides, the user guides on how to navigate through Sigma. One of those is this third one down here I've highlighted is the user guide for grantees. And it is pretty detailed, pretty simple to follow, step-by-step instructions with lots of pictures. There's also a help desk available. There's a phone number and a website or an email you can reach out to if you get stuck or have questions or comments. So, and we can also do what we can to help you navigate that process if you do need to get registered as a vendor. So before I turn it back over to Jerry for a few closing comments, and then we will be opening it up to question and answer. I would like to add just a couple closing thoughts here from my perspective. First, hopefully it comes out this way when you start looking through this grant and start implementing it. But we did try to be very intentional about making this grant as flexible and implementable as possible for folks out there. Again, taking into consideration the fact that districts are in very different places from county to county and district to district. And we really do want to see you guys get this money in your hands and put to good use. So we're doing everything we can. We'll make ourselves available in every way we can to help you implement these grants to be successful, to see this funding get put to good use, and more importantly, see it continue down the road, because it's just as important to us to see that happen as it is to you. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jerry, and we'll hear a few additional comments from Jerry. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. I really appreciate those comments. Excellent overview. And I see there's a lot of questions already posted in the chat box, and we'll get to those in just a moment. One thing that I will add, that as you get into this grant, we have the opportunity at a future time, either on a quarterly basis or however you give us your feedback, but we can do these webinars and perhaps answer your questions via a webinar, because I know you'll have questions not only tonight, but as you go forward. But I do want to follow up with just a few comments, and John, his closing comments hit on this, and that is we have a challenge going forward, and the challenge is to ensure that these funds are allocated by the legislature in FY23. So we've got them in FY22, but beginning 1 October, we need to look forward to FY23. And I say that because the appropriation, $2 million was allocated for ongoing, and that means that it is in the Department of Ag and Rural Development's budget. There's an additional 1 million to make up the 3 that is one-time funding. The legislature used the American Rescue Funds from federal government to appropriate the additional 1 million. So going forward, we need not only to make sure we don't have a legislator or legislators that want to pull out the ongoing funds, and hopefully they will not want to do that, but we also need to work with the legislature going forward in FY23 to get the 1 million or more into the department's budget as ongoing funds. So that's our challenge going forward. We will be working on that. We'll be asking you to work on that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're having this webinar tonight because of what you did over the past several months, the past year and more, to work with your legislator, talk to your legislator or legislators, and that grassroots effort worked. You were successful in doing what we needed to be done, and that is to get the appropriation. I want to make a couple comments just to amplify some of John's comments. And one of the things that the legislature, and I shouldn't say one, the primary thing that the legislature will be looking at are the outcomes. In other words, you invested this money, what were the outcomes of your investment? So John showed, and you can go back, since this is being recorded, you can go back and look at slides 19 and 20, where he talked about accomplishments and the fact that a business plan will need to be put forward beginning it for FY23. What we have talked about with the department, with John and his colleagues, is we'll most likely use the logic model so that we have a standard template for the business plan. So in your business plan, you have an opportunity to list under your objectives, to list the activities or outputs, and also the outcomes. And what the legislature will be looking at are, what are those outcomes that you were able to accomplish with the appropriation that they have provided? So an activity or an output, you have a field day or you have a meeting, fine, that's an output. But what happened as a result of that? And that's what the legislature will be looking at. What changes did the participants do as a result? And so of your activity. And so that's very easy to do. You can have 4 or 5 questions for those participants, and then you come back in 6 months or 9 months and you ask them what they did with that information. Good example, you have a meeting or field day on cover crops. You ask 4 or 5 questions, you collect that information from the participants, you come back in 9 months and say, okay, what did you do as a result of that field day or meeting about cover crops? Did you plant more acres, et cetera, et cetera? So that is what we're really looking at on how you invest your dollars, in terms of what are the outcomes from this investment, so that that information can be given back to the legislature. They really are not too interested in how many meetings you had, but they're interested in what changes as a result of your constituents. What did they do as a result of those meetings, those workshops, whatever those field days, whatever those events happen to be. So that, I just want to emphasize that point, that it's great to have numbers, but what we really need and what the department needs, because we will be working with the department, with John and his colleagues on this reporting for the legislature, but we really need to identify what are the changes that have been made as a result of your investment of $40,000 for each of your districts. So with that, I'll let Dan go to the chat box and open it up for questions. But again, thank you for attending. I see we have about 110 participants tonight. I looked at the list. I see there's quite a few directors on, and that's the reason we were doing this in the evening, so that we provide the directors that have full-time jobs, they're in harvest. We understand that. Many of them are in harvest season, but we wanted to give them an opportunity to participate live. So we appreciate the staff that took time also to join us tonight outside of your normal duty hours, although I know many of you work much more than normal, what we would say duty hours. So with that, again, thank you. And I cannot say enough about my thanks for all you did in working with your legislators to get this funding. So with that, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jerry. And before we get into our Q&A session, I just wanted to invite everyone here to a couple of events that are upcoming. This Friday, October 22nd, we're going to be meeting in East Lansing at Reno's East from 6 to 8 p.m. just to have a real informal celebration, just commemorating our legislative victory. So considering funding for conservation districts ended in 2009, and there hasn't been any operational funding from the state, this is a pretty big accomplishment. So there's a good amount of outdoor seating there, as well as a pretty big space inside. And we're just asking folks to RSVP. So if you go to MACD's website, macd.org, you should be able to see the RSVP information. We're just asking that folks shoot an email over to Taylor Pack, who's our new member services assistant. And then second, I want to encourage directors here especially. We have our upcoming virtual fall convention that's going to be happening November 8th, 9th, and 10th. And a lot of it's going to be recorded online as well, or actually all of it will be recorded, which can be accessed at a later date, should any directors or anyone want to potentially see some of the sessions. And one of the things that we're really excited to offer this year is that registration for directors is free. So it's a simple process. You definitely have to register in order to access the content at a later date. But if you go to macd.org, you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the link to the registration page. And if you have any questions on logging in, there's a link to connect with Taylor, who can help you get your account set up accordingly if you don't have one set up. So with that, we're going to move into the Q&A. And so there is a number of questions already here in the chat, and I think we'll go through with those questions first. And then if you want to ask your question live, you can raise your hand, and then I'll try to go into the order. And you see, I'll press the raise hand button and it'll show up on the window like that. So we will do our best to try to get to everyone in order, and we'll try to get through everyone's questions in a limited amount of time. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. The first question I saw in the chat was, let's see here. Where can we find the conservation needs assessment template? John, if you're still there.
That's a good question. I know that has been developed. Last I knew, it was residing with MACD. We can go back to that funding work group and see if we can get our hands on it, and we will be sharing that widely. Yeah, and I do think we have a couple RCs on. If I misspeak or if we already have that in hand, speak up and let me know, and we can correct that.
All right, there was another question. Can you use the money on other administrative staff?
Yes.
Okay, and then I think this was answered already. It was, have the grants been sent out by e-signature yet, which you did mention. It should be likely next week.
Yeah, again, hopefully within the next few days.
So are we required to send in the required documents if already sent in for another grant?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So for those of you who have an existing MDARD grant, we use a grants tracking spreadsheet that has it's an Excel spreadsheet, it has all the grants listed on there. And we have one tab for district operations that it really has been a carryover since back when we had district operations in the early 2000s. So we'll keep track of everything in that district operations tab. So because we use the same standalone mailbox, if you sent the information in, regardless of if you have a MEP grant or a FAP grant or whatever, it'll be accounted for, and you won't have to send it in more than one time. Now, with that said, if you, the audit sometimes gets people hung up a little bit. If you had a fiscal year 20 audit conducted and you sent that in last year during fiscal year 21, let me say that again. If you conducted an audit during fiscal year 21 for your fiscal year 21 grant, you will still need to send in your documentation for fiscal year 22, even though you sent it in last year. We run things grant year to grant year. So if you would have to resubmit in instances like that, but not more than one piece of document for multiple grants.
So Susie Knoll asked, with regard to reporting, what about part-time employees? Do you have to report part-time employees?
Yeah, so again, using that full-time equivalent, if it's less than 32 hours, then we would consider that a 0.5 FTE. So if you have, let's say you have 2 part-time people, we would consider that 1 FTE, if that makes sense. And I'm pretty sure we've tried to define that in the reporting document under the definitions tab.
So next question was from Kelsey Sweeney. It said, I'm interested if NRCS assistant grants are considered one conservation district program, quote unquote, or if each grant is its own program, i.e. NRCS assistance versus NFWF TA, CTI conservationists, NACD TA, etc.
Yeah, that's a good question, Kelsey. I would not count an NRCS program, so EQIP, CSP, things like that, as a district program. But if you have a grant like through NIFWIF, I would count that as a program. If you have more than one CTI grant, I would count those. That's a good question. I'll have to think about that one and get back to you, because that's a pretty rare instance. But I would define it as a standalone grant program.
Okay, and let's see, the next question actually comes from Rachel Guth. It's if the CD cannot finish the deliverables, would the advance need to be returned?
Rachel, you're supposed to be giving me softballs, not hard questions. No, I don't foresee that being an issue. I think that the intention again is for us to get this funding into folks' hands, and my hope again is that we did not create any barriers that are too difficult to overcome for folks. If you find yourself in that situation, let us know, and we will do everything we can to help you overcome those barriers. But no, we would not be asking for repayment of the installment, as far as I know at this point in time.
So this question from Susan Bristol, where do we get the document on the grant and how to submit it?
So it should be coming, in your case, Susan, directly to you in an email. Again, hopefully by Friday or early next week. We can make sure to send you a draft copy of the grant so you have it. I'll do that right after the meeting here tonight, Susan. And then right in that grant, it does spell out that MDA grants mailbox address where you would be sending any of the documentation. When you do the e-signature email, my understanding is you pretty much just click a couple buttons that says, yes, I agree, and sign it, and it automatically sends the email back to us for us to then take action.
Okay, next question is from Jennifer Ricker-Feek. It says a couple different parts here. Can you use this money to assist with buying a piece of land to expand district services? Can you use the money for rent if your office is unsuitable? And then can you use this money to buy a tree planter?
So generally, Jennifer, I would say yes to all those. Again, I would defer back to Jerry's comments and on the importance of tying any use of this money back to some outcomes that we can report back to legislature. I do think, especially the instance of buying equipment, I see that as expanding the district's program and further helping to deliver conservation programs to their constituents. Rent is a challenging one, but again, if you can tie that to better performing, better delivering conservation to your community, then then I think that makes it an easier sell. Jerry, do you want to weigh in on that one at all?
Yeah, I would just add, John, I think districts have an opportunity in their budgets. They may say, okay, I've got the state funding and we'll use that to leverage other funds. We'll use that to document outcomes. And if we need to, for an example, in this question, if we need to use money for rent, then maybe take the plant sales money or other monies that they have, sponsorship money or whatever. But I think these funds need to be tied to either leveraging additional funds or documenting outcomes. That's a short answer. We could go on, but I think I'll quit with that one, John.
So another question, are there any rules pertaining to COVID or strings with this grant, like vaccine status of any or all employees or board members?
No. And I say that with a bit of reservation, and that is simply because of the fact that this is so at this point in time, this is a federal mandate, not a state mandate. And we are still waiting on further guidance from USDA on how that mandate is going to be implemented in regards to conservation district staff and directors. We do have an agreement with NRCS, it's our CTI agreement, and by some of the language that has been provided in the guidance associated with that executive order, it may put some requirements on either the Environmental Stewardship Division or MDARD or the state of Michigan that we are still trying to seek some clarity around from USDA ourselves. So at this point in time, the answer is no. My hope is that that does not change, but we will obviously will communicate any information that we have regarding that if and when we get it.
Okay, next question's from Catherine Asterbani. Can we use this money for cost share practices?
Yes, and I think, again, deferring back to Jerry's earlier comments and comments just a few minutes ago, the key here is being able to document the outcomes of using the funding for that purpose. I think that is a very good one to be able to tell the story of the impact that this funding can have for conservation districts out there in the ground. So I think that would be a good use of the funding.
So I think you answered it in the presentation, so I'm going to skip that one. So question here from Elizabeth Rochelle. Would we count a program if it's housed in another county, but it covers several counties? For example, SISMA, would all 3 counties count it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I honestly hadn't thought of that. Let me do some brainstorming on that one with my team and some of the partners, and we'll get back to you on that. I don't want, and the reason I'm hesitant is I don't want to be double counting. I want to make sure that, you know, the information we report back to legislature is accurate, and obviously I want it to be very impactful, but I don't also want to have them call into question any of our results. So I would hate for us to do any unintentional double counting.
So there's a follow-up question from Catherine that said, for cost sharing, what documentation would be required for reporting?
I'll get back to you on that one, Catherine.
All right, next question comes from Corey Blibus. How extensive is the business plan? How many hours expected to create this?
That's a good question. We haven't created it yet. Again, in the spirit of this grant, the intention here is not to bog people down in administrative work, in bean counting, as Jerry likes to call it. The intention here is to develop some templates that are usable, easily adaptable, so that you can spend minimal amount of time doing getting something that's effective for your district in order to move things forward. So our hope is that it'll be simple, streamlined, and effective. And if anyone is interested in providing some input as we develop that, we certainly welcome that. So we'll be sharing that as we develop it, and we'll be open for feedback once we get something to share with folks.
And John, I might just add to answer Corey's question, if we end up using the logic model, it's pretty straightforward, and it's a matter of having a template and you just fill it in. So it's not all that difficult and are not time consuming.
So next question is from Dallas Chester. How do contracted workers get counted toward full-time equivalent?
I guess I would default to that that 32-hour threshold and look at how many hours you're contracting them for, and just try to do the math and get your, get close. Is it the equivalent of a full-time employee? Is it equivalent of a half-time employee? Do the best you can, and we can work with you directly on that one if you need more help on that.
And then there's another question here, and then we probably have time for, this is the last question that's in the chat, so we probably only have time for maybe one or two more. But the question's from David Schlanderer, and it is, can you share the consolidated reporting from all districts each quarter so we can also measure ourselves against other districts?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm sure we could provide that. I'll make a note of it right now.
And John, I might add, this might be a good segue into a follow-up webinar. Come back the second quarter and sort of review the reports that have come in and talk about what we're seeing and what we're not seeing in these reports. So that's a great question that is being asked.
So there's a question, another question here from Danita Sharon. We used to have a plan of work that we would submit. Will the business plan be similar to that?
Without knowing off the top of my head, Danita, what that business plan looks like, or your plan of work looks like, I can't be certain. But happy to take a look at what you've got. I'm a fan of not reinventing the wheel. If we've got some good examples out there that we can pull from, we will certainly take those into consideration.
And then our last question is from Jennifer Rieker-Feek again, and it is, will you define if we are co-located or standalone?
Jennifer, could you put a little more detail in that, just so I understand the question fully? Or if you're able to unmute, or if Dan can unmute you.
Just asked you to unmute there, Jennifer, if you want to clarify.
Hi, my question is kind of based on, we're a standalone office. We're expanding. We have been over the last 9 years or so, but there's a big difference in between the amount of services provided and kind of the capacity of the districts based on their co-located and non-co-located status. When you're comparing like how many people come through the door and how many people you help and, people who call and that sort of thing, a lot of times I feel that the co-located offices do have a higher likelihood of being able to count those numbers just because they are most often the ones who answer the main line to the office. So they're seeing a lot more people. It's also really easy if someone walks in to talk to the NRCS, their FAP foresters right there. The FAP foresters that work directly with the NRCS are active participants daily. So I'm just kind of wondering if when you guys do kind of base us against each other, how is it kind of ensured that we'd be comparing apples to apples and not, a little tiny town with one stoplight or a county with one stoplight versus say Lansing. So something like that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. The populations of our community, the government agencies that are located within our communities, that sort of thing.
Sure. Okay, I understand now. I guess I'll start by saying it is not our intention to use these grants or use the data that's collected through the reporting system to try to evaluate or compare one district to another or a group of districts to another group of districts. So our intention is to roll this data up and say statewide, these are the fantastic things that we were able to accomplish, that our conservation district partners were able to accomplish with this funding. And I'd say that the same is true with, with the operations elements that we've created and have been testing out over the last couple of years. These are tools that we're trying to put in your hands to help you folks be successful, whatever that means to you. To me, that's important, more important than, a definition that we come up with here in Lansing. So that is not the intention. I hope it didn't come off that way. We're hoping to see you guys do great things with this money that makes an impact for you folks locally. And then for us to be able to tell the story back in Lansing so that we can keep the money flowing. Does that help? I know I didn't really directly answer the question. And again, that's because that's not the intent of what we're trying to do.
All right. And with that, that was our final question. So just wanted to, again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We hope that this was a format that worked well for you. And again, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to be a resource for you, both MACD as well as MDARD with your regional coordinators. So with that, everyone have a good evening. We'll hope to see whoever's in mid-Michigan or within a reasonable drive, see you in Lansing this Friday at 6 p.m. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.